3 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when we were in Auckland, every session started with a keynote conversation. So we decided to use a similar process here for our sessions here. So I'm really very excited with our theme today of diversity and ethnicity to invite two very good friends, Chiu-Yu from Hong Kong and Oti from New Zealand, to speak to each other, and then maybe we might even have some questions from people. But on that topic, which is very dear to my heart, and the reason I've come to Hong Kong, and I keep going to Hong Kong over the last 16 years, is because of this amazing man, Mr. Chiu-Yu. So let's welcome him and let him talk to start the conversation going. All yours, Mr. Mok.
Hello. Yeah, how's everyone? Well, I'm going to speak, but I'm going to show you some a PowerPoint, actually, so that it becomes less boring. Diversity and ethnicity. Quickly, diversity is a universal value, which means we respect all races, ethnic groups, indigenous groups, persons of different abilities or speaking different languages. Ethnicity refers generally to ethnic identity. An ethnic group is a collectivity within a larger society having common ancestry, memories of shared historical past, and a cultural focus on one or more symbolic elements of defining their peoplehood. Examples of such symbolic elements are kinship patterns, religious affiliation, language or dialect forms, tribal affiliation, nationality, etc. Now, sadly, modern-day Hitlers are pursuing genocidal policy to eliminate minorities and diversity. Hong Kong is predominantly Cantonese, a dialect spoken in the Guangdong province. That reddened area of China is Guangdong province, and Hong Kong is a little point there, as you can see. Anyway, while Hong Kong is predominantly Cantonese, Cantonese is an ethnic minority in mainland China. The Cantonese language, I should say, is being threatened in Guangdong as well as Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, though, Cantonese are dominant. The Hakkas, Chiu-Chaus, Fukienese, Shanghainese, etc. are ethnic minorities. Hong Kong was a British colony. That's why I present to you this photo. Early days of Hong Kong, 1842, the British brought Indian soldiers. And of course, subsequently, they brought the Gurkhas. In the 1970s, Hong Kong's economy took off. And then you find the Filipino workers here. You see them dancing. Actually, it's a protest rally. And then followed by the Indonesians. And on Sunday, they went to this park and other places as well. And then, of course, there were the Thais and so on. So in Hong Kong, there lived many ethnic minorities, Chinese or otherwise. However, musically or culturally, Hong Kong Chinese pay little attention to the music and culture of our migrant workers or South Asian citizens. And the Cantonese majority care little about the Hakkas, Chiu-Chaus, or Hok Lo music. They know more about British and Western music, classical or pop. Some ethnic minorities themselves see what they possess, music or otherwise, as inferior. Take the case of Nam Yam, which is sung in Cantonese. It was sung in the past, by blind people. And it turned out that a blind social worker, a certain Mr. Owl, associated the music with begging. He then set up a band in his blind center to do Western and Canto pop music.
好，咁 pick up 翻頭先喺香港有。
Now here is a picture of the kind of pop music and modern music, that's going on. They're not singing Nam Yam. So today, a small section of the literati in Hong Kong do have an affection for Nam Yam. Likewise, the fisher folks of Hokklo origin hid their songs and even their language because they felt that they were inferior. Those who could sing fisher folk song were old and dying. Hong Kong started off as a fishing village, and it has become a metropolitan financial center. But in pockets where there is still fishing, some children are encouraged to pick up some of the old songs. So Peter, maybe we can hear a little song here.
Here we go.
I have to.
I'll share my screen and here we go. Share computer.
Ai dương bao chi tô đàn thao dân văn dung lòng ai xí chào ngồi về công phố rồi chặt thì mỗi lòng khăn mây say thổ thôi Cần tô phát khăn cá màu dầu xí hát ăn
Back to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Right. Where are we now? Okay. All right. So Hong Kong has become not anymore a fishing village, although there are still some fisher folks, but very few of them these days. Now, this is Chiu-Yu opera. And there's a sizable number of population who are Chiu-Yu, who come from another part of the Guangdong province. There used to be a time, when they had their own Chiu-Yu operatic troupe, and they would play every year at the Ghost Festival in makeshift theaters. Now, these days, what happens is that the Chiu-Yu people in Hong Kong could no longer form their own troupe, and so they invited troops from China to come to the Ghost Festival to sing for the population, to sing for the ghost and the gods. This is the old indoor of a Hakka family. Hakka is another ethnic minority in Hong Kong. In 2014, the Hong Kong government actually declared that Hakka Hill songs as Hong Kong's intangible cultural heritage. This man you see on the screen actually, is an expert on Hakka song. He wrote a PhD about Hakka songs in Hong Kong. According to his doctoral thesis, in 2014, there were about 400,000 Hakkas in Hong Kong. And Dr. Stephen Chan, student of Hakka songs, he was saying that in 2013, he could list 30 Hakka singers. Among them, the oldest was born in 1917 and the youngest in 1937. And he was not able to find any Hakka Hillsong singers. So Peter, again, maybe we can hear some Hakka songs.
Yep. Yeah, I'm doing it. Okay.
I have to give you.
No, it's okay. I just do it.
Okay.
當作歡迎家呀，生日裝要裝馬呀，三雙。
Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Killen.
Hey, what happened there?
Okay. Shall we continue? Or...
Yeah, continue. Yes, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I'm coming to the end of it. You heard just a little bit of Hakka songs. They could be singing about their own lives, and they could be courting songs, and they're sung at funerals and also at weddings. Anyway, 3 years ago in New Zealand, we talked about challenges faces the community music, right?
Yeah.
Oh dear. Oh, you know this guy, of course. Peter is the person who has brought community music more than a decade ago. And anyway, so we have been engaging ourselves in community music all these years. But this discussion of disappearing songs and music, I come to the conclusion that we have failed. I mean, Hong Kong has failed at least one major aspect of the mission of music, community music. That is to understand the fading away of our ethnic music. We should have got involved in preserving them and contemporizing the traditional and the ethnic. And at the same time, of course, reaching out to collaborate with non-Chinese ethnic groups. That's all I have to say, Peter, for the
Thank
walk-up.
you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mark. And now to let's just stop sharing. Okay.
Okay.
And now that's, I mean, it's fascinating. I'm not going to comment on that, and I'm going to just let Teoti sort of start talking. I've got your slides, Teoti, to show whenever you wish them to, but maybe you want to start by speaking yourself. You're muted. You're muted.
So first of all, can I thank you, Mark, for that. I just want to say one of the greatest things I find of greatest value in this regional, how can we call this? This regional division of CMA, really, the APCM. The thing I find most impactful and valuable is being able to hear people from different regions talk about things that we do without particular nuance in that area. So I really appreciate, Mark, that was very interesting for me to hear. And I want to come to the end of that, the challenges facing community music funding and sharing in just a moment, because I'm going to speak quite simple. I'm going to speak a little bit differently about the ethnicity and diversity components. I'm quite a simple boy, really. However, in saying that, I have 3 slides, but what's impactful in my work at the moment is that I'm heavily involved in a research project that's just winding up on how Australia and New Zealanders value the arts and finding a language that is more inclusive of all of the voices represented in our population, and how that will, I'm interested in how that's going to trickle down really from those policymakers to the community level, and potentially help us sustain some of these practices. But let me just first introduce myself. Hi, I'm Chiu-Yu. I'm from the University of Auckland in the South Pacific. The team I play for, I like to say it that way, I play for is, I'm a classically trained musician. I'm an opera singer by training and vocation. And I work in a university context at a school of music based on a hybrid model that integrates the conservatory traditions of Western Europe and the Northern American higher music education models. I think we're all familiar with that. That being said, what is relevant to this discussion with regard to ethnicity and diversity is that I work in a colonial context, and that's why I refer to my country as Aotearoa New Zealand, because we have two languages, and Aotearoa is the indigenous word, and it's quite standard. And it's in the South Pacific, and that's important, place is important. I'm indigenous Māori, and I am gay. And I think all of this nuances my personal response to the team, ethnicity and diversity. So I'm going to be pragmatic. I'm going to explain ethnicity in our regional terms. So in New Zealand, we have something called Statistics New Zealand. In Māori, I hope they don't try to translate this, is Tatauranga Aotearoa. And so ethnicity for us, according to this government department, which is the official data agency for New Zealand, ethnicity is, I'm sorry, Peter, you might want to pull up the, sorry, might want to pull up my slides because I might even have the words here. The second slide, if you can go to that. Yeah, here you go. It's just a little bit easier for those who are not first language English to see it. So ethnicity is a measure of cultural affiliation. It is not a measure of race, ancestry, nationality, or citizenship. Ethnicity is self-perceived, and people can belong to more than one ethnic group. And so this is important in my context in New Zealand, because indigenous Māori, of which I am, we self-identify and we acknowledge our other ancestry, but central to our being Māori is our, what we call whakapapa or genealogy, the knowledge of our tribal history, and specifically how we descend from a specific ancestor within our tribal narrative. And in this way, we know our place, meaning our land. We are able to interconnect and interact and care for family members and community members that share these histories, which is really important as the concept called whakawhanaungatanga, which is actually our word for community. So on the left of this slide, this is what I would introduce. In New Zealand, I introduce myself with this. And this tells everyone who is there, who is Māori, where I come from, how I got there, what my landmarks are, and who my tribes are, and what my ancestral lands are. And they can begin to build connections with me. So,
can you say those words to us?
Yeah, which ones? The English, the Māori?
No, the Maori.
Oh, for sure. Ko nā toki matawhārua Aotea takitumu nā waka. That means those are my waka. Waka is canoe. Ko maunga taniwha taranaki tamatia ngā mauna. So those are my mountains. Ko ngā puhi kaitahu ngāti rua noi ngā iwi. My tribes. And ko manamuka taipora nui te wheke ngā marae. And those are my homelands, my little homelands. I have 3 of them.
Thank you.
So if we go to the next slide, I want to now talk a little bit about diversity. So again, I receive and acknowledge the dominant discourses around diversity from other nations, but what may be relevant and interesting for this forum is to focus attention on the local demographics or the cultural and political differences that impact my region. So I'm going to give you a definition from, of all places, the New Zealand Treasury. And they have a framework called the Living Standards Framework. Now, the Living Standards Framework is a flexible framework that prompts our thinking about policy and impacts across different dimensions of well-being. And the tools draw on a range of data that evidence all of the interdependencies of those different dimensions of well-being, and is seen by our government as promoting robust economics if we consider all of these data. So for them, it's less a definition and it's more an action plan. So it sees diversity as promoting broader perspectives, encouraging and valuing preferences, cultures, and experiences. They see diversity as encompassing ethnicity, gender, and disability, and perspectives vary within the population groups, but in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we include the indigenous Māori, and we understand that diversity includes everyone and ensures no one is left behind. So as a colonial country like Hong Kong, and of the British variety, like Hong Kong, we have, you know, in our instance, it's not surprising, but indigenous rights dominates our diversity discussions. And that's because we have a really interesting document called the Treaty of Waitangi, which is essentially an international treaty of cession. So it's sort of it's a document that ended our independence, the Māori independence, and came into partnership with the British Crown, which had the right to govern New Zealand, but they had to guarantee that Māori had full authority over all of their things, which means arts, culture, and the land. Of course, this is a larger discussion than now, so I'm not going to go there, but let me just state that in terms of community arts education, and specifically for this audience, community music, the socio-political reality of communities seems to heavily impact the nature of community music, the agenda of community music groups, and the freedom of community music groups to participate, and most importantly in my life at this moment, the funding of community music groups. So the reason I say all of this, sorry, that's quite a long way round, is that for me at this time, I'm really interested in the macro level analysis of the diversity of the region's highest decision-making table. I think that's really interesting. And we had an election 2 weeks ago, and it sort of hit a lot of global news feeds because it is the most diverse government we've ever had. And I want to talk through that a little bit. First of all, it ran really smoothly by global standards. I mean, you know, obviously we all know what's going on in America. But what we saw was a slide from the center right, which is quite conservative, to center left, and a parliamentary majority by our center left party, the Labour Party, who can now form a government alone. So to put this through another lens, the Conservative Party was very, in our terms, in our language, was very white. There were very few people of color, very few women, very few indigenous, and for the most part, straight. And so what we saw in that government move was a move to the left. And there you can see a photo of our Labour Department and of our Labour Party, and you can see some of the news items, which are quite extraordinary. The Guardian online political commentators claim that now we have one of the most diverse parliaments in terms of gender, minority, ethnic, and indigenous representation, the largest number of Māori representatives, and we also have about 10% of the members in the House as LGBTQ community. So this is likely the most diverse parliament in the world. And I think that's really interesting. I mean, it hasn't come easily, and we've worked very hard to achieve it. And I suppose for me, the question is, how is this going to change the way our nation talks about the arts and community and funding, particularly in a time of COVID? This government got in because of its stance on COVID, without a doubt. It certainly was one of the main reasons. But more than that, it's seen us through many difficult moments. And what is going to be interesting in the next few years to see how that trickles down. Now, so that's my ethnicity diversity discussion. And Pete, I just have a quick question. Do you want me to talk a little bit about the rise of dime? Because in terms of diversity, that was interesting.
Let's just go back to Mock and then Okay. So the contrast between the leaders of New Zealand and Hong Kong could not be greater at this present time.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah.
It's quite staggering, really, when you look at that power sharing. And just before we go back to you, Mock, to kind of comment on that, because I think that could be very interesting to hear a little bit on those sort of things and how the groups that you talked about now have what power they have and how any of the work that we do can give people power. But I'd just like to say we are on Facebook Live, and there might be people watching on Facebook Live. You're very welcome. And there's various other people I've seen have joined us since we started. So you're very welcome. Hello, hi Ryan. Mock, would you like to just talk a little bit, how can power be given to any of those diverse groups in Hong Kong that you talked about earlier?
I was thinking, what community music can do, actually. We have always said that, art is empowering, particularly, if the workshop, whether it's in music or theater, is participatory, and it's Paulo Freire-like, it's actually, coming together and allowing, people to be creative, to be able to express whatever, which is inherent and found in them. As long as, a facilitator can do that, that by itself is very empowering. Of course, when a collective sings songs together, protest song and so on, so forth, it can be empowering as well. There are different ways, I think, to empower. The fact is that art and music can play an important role. Yeah.
And then does that take people into? It doesn't give people power in terms of changing the kind of the situation of their lives, but it gives a lot of individuals and communities a chance to kind of realign themselves, I suppose.
Yeah, well, very often, it's a struggle for power, actually. I want to compare Australia and New Zealand, for example. Just now, there was this great treaty, that empowered or that gave power to the indigenous people of Maori, but what happened to the Aborigines in Australia? So, I mean, as a colony, when it was a British one, the British, colonial government simply monopolized the power. Not that there wasn't any fighting, but they were soon defeated.
And in terms of in equivalent in New Zealand, Teote, how's that? Is the power, it's taken a long time for power to share?
Even though we had a treaty, what I think has been significant for us is the culture of power, which is the settler colonies, the people who immigrated here from Britain. They have been a part of the discussion. And without buy-in from that political elite, we couldn't have made change. And the difference has been is that we've had to fight through the law system to have the rights of the treaty honored. And in order to do that, we had to set up, the government had to set up, not us, government had to set up a referendum and a committee to deal with it. So I mean, I'm listening to this and I had this conversation with Lee, Willingham in Canada about, can we do it from grassroots up in terms of power? Can community music be a part of that sweep up? And I was sort of like, well, actually, I would say no. What community music has done for us in terms of the indigenous sustaining of traditions and cultures it's been a way for us to lift ourselves up, lift our communities up in the face of not having power. But really what's made change has been the culture of power, participating in changing the discussions at the highest level and allowing us to have room and space to develop. And I think that has to happen. I think that's happened for women in the world. Men have had to sort of make room for that space. I think it's very much happened. So in New Zealand at the moment, the culture of power, which is extraordinary, is not white and male and straight. It is gay, it is transgender. We have people who, I mean, obviously lots of women leaders. I mean, it's really, really diverse and it has changed our whole framework, but it has been a long time in coming. And in order to do that, we had to shake down those institutions that have traditionally been in place. So, and it's now, we're in this really weird position now where people who are gay in cultures are part of the culture of power. So now, of course, we advocate for trans rights. Likewise, for women, most of the women in power are white. So they are advocating for people of color who are female to have their part in the, you know, so it just trickles down. But that first layer has to be in our context. And of course, this looks different across Asia, of course, for lots of different reasons. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Yeah. I want to say something about cultural power too, you know. In 1842, when the British arrived, you know, they brought their guns. And then, of course, they brought, you know, their churches. And at the same time, you know, they had the cultural power apart from political and economic power. So they introduced to Hong Kong people Shakespeare, little songs like Soldier, Soldier, Would You Marry Me? And things like that, you know. And given time, actually, British, you know, make the British, the English language, you know, to be the language, you know, that allowed you to improve, you know, materially and so on, you know. So it's a whole set of powers, you know, that lead to people in Hong Kong accepting, you know, British culture and subsequently, you know, Western pop music and so on and so forth, you know, with all these songs disappearing gradually.
Yeah. Interesting. But now trying to treasure and to bring back a focus to some of the Hakka songs or the Fisher songs or things, you know, that's all part of trying to, is that a revolution? Can that be a revolutionary process? Can that be something that's actually, can that be done? Yeah, it's interesting what change that can make to the people's sense of who they are.
Yeah, I think so. You know, we should be talking to our community musicians there. You know, we should start, you know, learning these songs or music. And of course, you know, I said something about contemporizing them, making them relevant to present society. Because, you know, these songs were sung, you know, when the rites of passage, you know, were very different in the past, you know. Society is very much different now, but still, I think, you know, we can still keep the heritage and then, you know, revitalize it.
Yeah. Interesting. We've got another 5 minutes or so of this before we go into our breakout rooms. Teo, did you want to, is there anything you'd like to respond to with that?
Well, no. I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. It's just, I have been working very much in a research project with the Ministry of Culture, and there is a document that I did not know very well that I had to read in New Zealand. And for those who are looking at how to perhaps allow marginalized culture and arts to have a life, there is a document, or there is a legal document called Why 262, WAI 262. And if you Google it, what it was a group of Māori bringing to a tribunal, the Waitangi Tribunal, a court case that said that their rights and their cultural rights were not honoured by the Crown, by the British Crown. And this included flora and fauna, medical, carving, all cultural aspects, as well as medical, medicine and land and spiritual. And it was a really interesting document to read because the tribunal found that actually they were right. And that began, and this was in 2011, and that began all of our legal processes being changed to include Māori with the main culture, everything become bilingual, all cultural funding to be divided equally. And interesting, and coming back to the churches, the churches were pivotal in that change in the culture of power, because the churches came up with a document, a bicultural document that honored that aspect. So it is, all of these little things come together at the same time. And I would say that 2011 document has resulted in this election that we have right now. I mean, it's part of the general shape of it. Where it impacts our arts making and community arts making is that all of the things Moch's talking about within the Hong Kong context, it wouldn't happen here, but for that document. For that document and for those legal processes changing, and now it is happening.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
I mean, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal, really. Yeah.
Wouldn't we all like to move to New Zealand or bring your governments to our country?
No, please don't. Please don't.
Please,
houses are expensive enough as it is.
We'll join you too.
Yes. There's some interesting stuff going on in the chat. It's just conversations about what cultural power is, and also about the, I mean, we can't go on to, one of the initiatives that Teota is involved in at the moment is called DIME, which is about, an international group of people looking at decolonizing and decolonizing music education and sort of indigenizing music education. We can't really go into it very much now, but it is that whole thing of ban the ABRSM from the world. Don't let them leave England.
I would say it is like CMA on speed, because it is literally a decolonizing project. And it's got an indigenous steering group that's been created that I think will operate across pan-tribally across all ISME. And I think it needs to happen. And the only safe place that really indigenous people can discuss their issues and their allies has been CMA. CMA has been the place where this can happen. And APCM is hugely responsible for that. Hugely responsible for that. The delegates that came from this region really nuanced CMA and have permeated, like COVID, permeated ISME and really had a change. And so this is the time, really. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm just going to just say, so those were some terms that ISME is the International Society of Music Education that has a huge sort of academic and teacher-led sort of conference every 2 years. And the CMA is the community music activity part of that. And we meet every 2 years. And this grouping here who are meeting here from this region are really important part of those. We're going to have to move now though. So can I thank both of you very, very much. Chiu-Yu from Hong Kong and Teota from New Zealand. I mean, we could carry on conversation, and there are lots of other things that are coming up in the chat about cultural power and all of those issues. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're going to split into our 3 rooms. Some people, we're going to post into the chat, the Zoom, because if you're in Kumi's workshop, you need to go to a different Zoom meeting. If you're going to the round table, you'll go to the round table. And if you're going to hear the presentations, you'll go into that one. So into the chat, Anne is going to place the Zoom link for Kumi's session.